Michael Fanone nearly died defending the Capitol from rioters. He suffered burns, a heart attack, and brain injuries. According to Fanone, the federal takeover, quote, makes no sense. Federal law states that the president can only take control of D.C.'s law enforcement on an emergency basis, and there's no emergency happening on the streets of D.C. right now. Sure, there's crime, homelessness, and other problems that you see in any city, but the crime rate has actually been steadily falling. Trump's not trying to fight crime. He's trying to assert dominance, end quote. Michael Fanone joins me now. He's a retired D.C. Metropolitan Police officer. He served 20 years in Washington, D.C.'s police department. He helped defend the Capitol on January the 6th. He's also the author of Hold the Line, The Insurrection and One Cop's Battle for America's Soul. Michael, great to have you on the show. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
I think you would agree. All Americans would agree. We certainly don't want to be put on the wrong side of saying crime is bad and we'd like to fight all crime in cities. But there has been a trend in major cities, and particularly in Washington, D.C., toward lower crime. If it wasn't an emergency in Donald Trump's first term, it's certainly less of an emergency now.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, it goes without saying there is crime in Washington, D.C., and there is a crime problem in Washington, D.C. And I see the president's response to that feels as though he should deploy the National Guard. And the issue that I take with that is there is no crime, there's no spike in crime that we're experiencing in Washington, D.C. And even then, what is it exactly that the National Guard will do to quell that other than, the optics of this occupying force, which I think most Americans resent. I certainly would resent that if I saw this show of force in my community. And I know a lot of D.C. residents that I've talked to over the past weeks certainly resent seeing this in their community. And it does nothing. Having armored vehicles parked on, the National Mall does nothing except create this illusion of, or the idea of fear and an occupying force. Then if you talk about the way that Donald Trump is now deploying these federal agencies, the three-letter agencies, ATF, yep, DEA, FBI, there is a place. I was a federal task force officer. I worked alongside of federal partners as a Metropolitan Police officer. There is a place for that. That place is not having roving bands of officers in tactical gear aimlessly walking around, Georgetown or downtown Washington, D.C., again, creating, the optics of an occupying force and fear. The community policing model was born out of this. Yes. And it's an imperfect model. But
you're trained for it. You're trying to get, everybody's trying to get better at it, right? It's imperfect, but it's the idea that that's a different role than the National Guard has.
Well, it comes from, the idea that these agencies are charged with keeping the community safe, and citizens should have a say-so in how they are policed. And so citizens don't want to feel as though they're occupied. They want to be safe, but they don't want to feel like they're being, occupied by an army. And that's what you have now taking over in D.C. And it's not an efficient use of those resources. They could be better used. Federal agencies do a few things really, really well. They know how to conduct long-term investigations, and they bring with them federal resources, technology, money that local police departments don't have access to. Yeah. And so that's how these, agents should be used to bolster these, federal task force, not out there walking around harassing citizens and pissing people off who have to, are trying to go about their daily business and see this in their streets.
The other question I've got is ICE. It feels like this all feels like the National Guard and ICE. It all feels like Donald Trump trying to sort of normalize the idea that his police are in charge, not your police, not the D.C. police that are answerable to the city council of D.C., his police who are answerable to him. There's some bad precedents to that in history.
I agree. And I think it's important, you hit the nail right on the head. ICE is Donald Trump's police department. When the American people think federal agencies, they should separate the FBI, the DEA, yes, the ATF from ICE.
Yes.
the behavior that I have seen displayed by ICE agents over the past, month or so is unjustifiable. I'm sure there are some ICE agents that are out there that, are just trying to do their job. But again, I look at it as though, complicity in this, silence is complicity. Quit your job. And that would be my message to everyone in the law enforcement community that's being co-opted by the Trump administration to do things that are immoral, unethical, and in many cases unconstitutional. Yep. Quit your job.
Tonight, there are urgent questions surrounding some of the most vulnerable people living in Washington, D.C. during Trump's takeover of the nation's capital. Authorities were seen clearing out homeless encampments across the Capitol this week. It's all part of Trump's stated goal of cracking down on crime and cleaning up the city. They've called it beautification, despite the fact that the D.C. Metropolitan Police say violent crime is down 26% in the Capitol right now. On Tuesday, White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt gave us a clue where people could end up.
Homeless individuals will be given the option to leave their encampment, to be taken to a homeless shelter, to be offered addiction or mental health services, and if they refuse, they will be susceptible to fines or to jail time. While we are targeting criminals and trying to remove criminals off of the streets, we also want to make D.C. safe and beautiful, and that involves removing mentally disturbed individuals and homeless encampments as well. So we will be using these regulations and code that already exists to clean up our streets.
Susceptible to fines or jail time. Joining us now is Donald Whitehead, Executive Director of the National Coalition for the Homeless. Donald, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're so grateful to have your voice at the table. I want to start with you just helping Americans understand who maybe don't have much familiarity with what these processes actually mean.
Sure.
What does it mean for someone to experience one of these sweeps? What is the impact?
The impact, it's all negative. There are no positives to these kinds of sweeps. I actually call them raids because they're more like raids than they are sweeps, and you shouldn't be talking about sweeping people. So there are no positive impacts for this kind of thing to happen. When people are moved to other locations, they lose contact with social service agencies. Study after study has said that their mental and physical health can get worse in these conditions. It is just really terrible for people for a number of reasons, those that I mentioned, and also just people are terrified right now. If you were living in the place that you had to live because there's not enough housing in this country. That is the main reason that people are homeless, and someone takes away your temporary shelter with a bulldozer. And we know that a couple of times people have died. The bulldozer comes in and scoops people up, and sometimes they don't take the time to even know that someone's still in the encampment.
For a lot of viewers, they may not necessarily understand the transition from what it is to be in an encampment, that is a space that you have made work for you for a particular amount of time, to being forced to go to an actual shelter. Can you explain for our audience what the actual challenges of being in that situation may be so that people understand the challenges around the transition and why? Because there are folks who will say, well, it's a shelter. I mean, it's better than being out on the street. There are services that are going to be provided to you. They said that you would get the option of mental health treatment and everything else. Why is it for people who may not understand that may not necessarily be a viable option or an attractive option to someone who's unhoused?
Well, it's a great question. And the real underlying issue is nowhere in this country is there enough shelter in the first place. So when they raid your encampment, there's absolutely no guarantee that you'll go to a shelter. Typically what happens is people move from one unsheltered location to another. So you haven't solved anything. So by criminalizing people, fining, jailing, giving people tickets, you actually exacerbate homelessness. You make it worse. Yeah. Now people have a criminal record to deal with, and their opportunity to get in housing is that much more of a burden. The opportunity to get a job is that much more of a burden. And again, we don't have enough shelter in any city in the United States right now.
I know. Sorry, go ahead, sir.
No, That's fine.
And now I was going to pick up on that point and ask you, because I know there's no silver bullet to the problem of homelessness. How do you begin to structurally address the issues that you're talking about, which include everything from proper health care to those who need it, and to try to create more housing, affordable housing in the immediate short term when that is a long-term planning or urban planning policy issue?
Well, we have to get our elected officials to invest in the solutions to homelessness that meet the scale of the issue. So the other thing we have to do is we have to go upstream. We have to make sure people aren't becoming homeless in the first place. So in this country, this will probably shock you, 19,000 people become homeless for the first time. So 19,000 people enter a system, which does pretty well once people enter the system. So, and in D.C., homelessness had been reduced by 9% year over year. So the services on the ground, the professionals that do this work are doing a fantastic job. What we need now is the cooperation of our elected officials. So again, we've never funded homeless services to the level of need. And in fact, this president's budget would zero out most of the most effective evidence-based practices that deal with homelessness. He wanted to put time limits on subsidized housing. Only a quarter of the people who should get subsidized housing and are eligible for it actually receive it. So we have a major housing problem in this country. We have 7 million less units than we have a need for those units in this country.
I got to ask you, though, before we go, because I know you wrote about this in your book and the race component in this. There have been a lot of, historical patterns that are reemerging in the way, in recent events, in the way that the Trump administration is going about this. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on how you see the connection between historical events in Black families and what is happening now again in D.C.
We have a very long history in this country of abusing, exploiting people who are unhoused or housing insecure.
Trump has always wrapped himself in the slogan of law and order. He stood on stages and declared himself the friend of cops, the defender of blue lives, the tough guy willing to crack down on crime. But behind the slogan was something far darker. He never saw police officers as public servants who protect communities. He saw them as his private army, tools to intimidate, silence opponents, and keep them in power. When he praised police at rallies, it wasn't respect, it was manipulation. He wanted loyalty, not law. And yet, when push comes to shove, like on January the 6th, when officers like Michael Fanone were fighting for their lives against a violent mob, Trump actually did nothing. He watched it unfold on television, and he left officers bleeding, beaten, and abandoned. When former DC Metropolitan Officer Michael Fanone testified before Congress about the January 6th attack, he said he was beaten, unconscious, and suffered a heart attack and thought he might die, all because Donald Trump incited a mob to storm the Capitol. Now, Fanone's story isn't just about that one day. It's about how Trump used law enforcement as pawns and then threw them away when they didn't serve his agenda. Now, in a twist no one saw coming, police officers across America are refusing to obey Trump's latest orders. The man once bragged that the police loved him more than anyone else is now suddenly facing a rebellion from the very institution he thought he once controlled. Now, this is a pushback reveals just how dangerous Trump's authoritarian project has become and why it's actually collapsing. Fast forward to today, Trump, desperate to regain power, has reportedly issued sweeping directives ordering law enforcement to restore order in ways that cross constitutional lines. He demanded crackdown on demonstrations, surveillance of political opponents, and even the selective targeting of journalists. But this time, many officers said no. Departments across the country are refusing to carry out his instructions. They aren't just questioning his authority, they're rejecting it outright. Because the orders Trump is giving aren't about public safety, they're about consolidating his personal power. And for police officers who swore oaths to uphold the Constitution, carrying out those orders would mean betraying the very principles they were sworn to defend. Let's be clear, this isn't new behavior from Trump. His entire political career has followed the authoritarian playbook. Demonize critics, call the press the enemy of the people, spread conspiracy theories to justify extraordinary powers, and most of all, demand absolute loyalty from institutions designed to be independent. Now, this is why he has always been so obsessed with the police and the military. In his mind, these forces exist not to save the people, but to actually serve him. But to America, isn't supposed to work like that. Our system is built on checks and balances, on laws that apply to everyone, on the idea that no leader is above the Constitution. Trump has never understood that, and now the police are reminding him of it in the most direct way possible, by refusing to obey. Think about what this means symbolically. Law enforcement has long been one of Trump's strongest bases of support. He posed with officers, he praised them endlessly, and he relied on their image to strength, but now the image is cracking. When police officers refuse to carry out his orders, it sends a message far bigger than any one act one of defiance. Now, it says that Trump's authoritarian project is failing. It says that even those he thought his loyal enforcers are standing up and saying, "No, Mr. Trump, we serve the Constitution and not you." The resistance is not from politicians or activists, but from the very people Trump counted on to do his bidding, and that should terrify him. Michael Fanone's story still hangs all over this. He was nearly killed because Trump unleashed a mob on his own country, and then Trump mocked Fanone, dismissed his trauma, and celebrated the attackers. That betrayal is now echoing across police departments. Officers remember what Trump did. They remember how he abandoned those on the front lines, and they know that obeying him now would actually mean sacrificing their integrity, their oath, and ultimately their country. Fanone himself has said Trump is a threat to democracy. Now it seems more and more officers agree. This is the moment. It's actually bigger than Trump. It's about the future of democracy in America, because authoritarian leaders always try to weaponize the police. It's one of the oldest tricks in the book, but democracy survives when institutions refuse to go along, when people in power say no, even at a personal risk. Right now, police defying Trump is proof that America's guardrails are holding. It's proof that loyalty to the Constitution still matters, and it's proof that Trump's grip on power is actually slipping. Finally, I'd like to finish off by saying Trump built his brand on the idea that he was untouchable, that the police and the military would always back him no matter what. But today, that myth is collapsing. Officers are refusing to obey. They're choosing country over Trump. Now, that choice actually matters, because at the end of the day, democracy only survives when people stand up to authoritarians. Trump wanted loyalty. What he got instead was resistance. Now, thank you very much for watching. If you believe in holding the power accountable, hit like and share this video and subscribe for more, because the fight for democracy isn't over, and neither is the fight against Donald Trump.